Hello everybody, welcome back to How to Make a Surfboard series. This is the 5th episode. We're nearing the end now. We've got to give the board a hard edge so the sander can blend the hard edge into the soft rails, which is what we intended for in the shape when we were in the shaping bay. And then encase the board completely in resin so that we can sand it flat to a polish-like finish, you know, like you'd get on a car. Well, this one's actually going to be matte finish, but just so you've got a solid resin casing and everything feels smooth, and it just feels basically like a hard version of the shape that you did in the shaping bay, but with logos and fin boxes in it. That's the idea. So the first thing we're going to do is tape up the hard edge. When that goes off, we are going to hot coat the bottom, then we're going to flip the board over and hot coat the deck. So I'm going to go through those stages now. It's a quiet job, so as long as I shout, and I won't wear a mask for the purposes of this video, although I would always suggest if you're working with resin and catalyzed resin, always wear a mask, but for 10 minutes I'll be alright. I think I've stunted my growth enough in this factory as it is. So I'm going to keep my mask off and just talk you through the process. It's a tried and tested method that factories have variations of all over the world. I'm just going to show you how we do it. Without further ado, let's mask up the boxes and tape up our hard edge. Yeah, so we're just going to apply these stickers over the gaps in the boxes. These stickers come from, well, they come with the boxes, so if you buy a set of these boxes you'll get 2 sets of stickers so that you can make the board. They just go over there for obvious reasons. We don't want resin spilling into the inside of the box. And there's all different, oh, that's the right hand side. There's all different thoughts as to if you leave those stickers on and sand them off, or do you lift them off when you hot coat. And for me, if you remember in the sanding process, I finished the boxes with a higher grade. I went over them with 180, so the stickers stick really nicely. And when they come off, it's nice and smooth there. So I'm not too fussed about having to sand that back down. So what I actually do is I take the stickers off early, so it's easier for the sanders to get a nice finish around the box without hitting cloth. And hitting cloth is a visual sign that you've gone through the outer casing of resin back to your fiberglass. And although, as long as it's not a complete burn through, it doesn't hugely structurally affect it, it does technically mean that you don't have as much resin there as you intended. And the idea of making a surfboard is that everything's intentional. That's the idea of anything high performance, in my opinion, is that you do exactly what you envisioned doing when you started the surfboard. So as minimal cloth touches as possible in your finish sand is really, really helped by all the setups. So first thing, I've got my stickers on. I'm going to line the board up on the stand so the board's not rocking, so the board's nice and level. That basically means that the resin is going to flow nice and flat. Something that's really important when you're doing your hot coats, and something that helps the sander, in this case it's going to be me, is no digs when you're sanding, no low and high spots and dry spots and wet spots when you're laminating. And then when you're hot coating, you don't want to be pooling resin in certain areas, so he's got to try and get that flat, or you have a big ugly dark patch of resin and it makes the weight of the board off, it makes the flex of the board off, it looks ugly, and it makes everyone's life harder when they're manufacturing the board. So a nice flat board is really, really essential. I'm going to tape up the hard edge with some 2-inch masking tape, and this is just creating a small lip. So what I'm doing is putting this tape on to create a small reservoir that resin can sit in. And if you notice, I'm not stretching the tape. I'm trying to keep the tape as slack as possible so it doesn't stretch and contort its shape. You can see this gap here. I don't know if the camera can pick that up. There's a small gap here. What I want is I want the tape stuck to the apex of the rail. I don't want the tape to stick to the top of the rail, because you're not going to be able to get resin that blends into the side that you can then shape back into your hard edge. Now, if you make the reservoir too big, your resin will sag inside that reservoir and you'll have a sort of a void that will be really hard to sand out. You don't have to use disposable latex gloves. If you've got a decent set of marigolds that you want to use, you can always use marigolds and just keep using them again and just wash them in the acetone after you finish and hang them back up. In production, we do a mix of both. For the purpose of this video, it's easier for me to use these and just chuck them away. I don't want resin on my hands. So what I'm going to need is a pot, something to stir my resin, and a 1 to 1.5 to 2 inch resin brush. If you've only got one brush, you can use bigger or smaller, but you know, obviously we're in production, we've got everything we sort of need, like at optimum level, so we use a 2 inch brush to do this. Around about 60 to 70 grams of resin in that pot. It's a very small amount, and you're going to use 1% of catalyst. Give that a quick stir. Now, a lot of people think when they're manufacturing surfboards that you have to do this edge with waxed resin, but what I found is when you're doing your hard edge, if you use waxed resin, as in resin that's got wax and styrene in it to rise to the surface to make it sandable, that resin has small crystallization of wax in it and it's softer, very, very slightly softer. So if you want a really pinging hard edge, it's quite hard to do with waxed resin. So we actually do the hard edge only with just standard lamb resin. So what we're going to do is to start where our tape goes in, and we're just going to paint the resin pretty roughly down into the void. At this stage, it's just about liberal amounts, pouring it into that void. I don't know if Joan can get a close up on that lens, but you can kind of just see that resin falling into that void. We're going to take off any excess resin. Doesn't need to be there. Got to be careful at this stage, don't dig it out of the edge with the brush. And at this stage, now you've got a bit of resin, what you'll notice when you sand it is you might get micro bubbles around the plugs. This is a really, really good time in production just to dab around the stickers and fill any of those little micro holes with this lamb resin. Gonna save you a job at the end of the finish sand. Gonna ultimately make the board look better as well. And it only takes 2 seconds, so why not? Now the other thing this does is it gives you a nice protective layer around areas where you're blending hard edge into soft edge, where you could touch the cloth of the original laminate. So it's a really nice idea just to give it a little bit of a liberal coat around here with that lamb resin. There's just some extra protection. If you can see, I'm just feathering those edges so there's no hard areas of resin to no resin. So it's easy for the sander to blend. It's nice and flat. You can see that resin, that reservoir of resin that I've built up. We don't want all of that to stay on the board, it's just giving enough for the sander to be able to sort of bring it back round into the original shape. So you can kind of see it pulling up there, and it should just be nice and neat. So once you finish, what we do then is we take the end of a roll of tape that we've used, and we just prop that tail up there, ensuring that the board's still flat. And what that does is it means that the resin doesn't automatically all fall to the tail and you get too much build-up of resin on the tail, because again, it's just another job for the sander, isn't it, to have to burn through some of that resin to get it all nice and flat. We're going to wait 15-20 minutes until that resin has gone off. It doesn't need to be completely dry. If you want to be really, really extra specially pernickety, what you can do is leave that dry completely and then hand sand the edge in a little bit before you do your gloss coats, which is going to make it even easier for the sander. I'm okay. I think I've done it neat enough where I don't need an extra sand on top, but if you are at all worried, you can take the tape off, leave it to dry, come back the next day and just hand sand it visually all in to make it really nice and straight, so any tape wobbles there or slight dips that are there aren't going to cause an issue when you're sanding. Let's go and have a cut tea, and we'll be back in a minute to pull the tape and do the bottom hot coat. Change of plan. We started doing this hot coat yesterday, and I remember I said I was just going to pull the tape on the hard edge and then get straight into the hot coat. But then we got a call from Fistral. The waves were looking pretty fun, and we were going to do some filming on a chili jam. Me, yours truly, trying to catch some waves for some footage, which went amazingly. We are now going back to the idea of sanding this hard edge back in. So as you can see now, we've got this hard edge resin. We're now on the next day, so the resin is hard. So I can now take an extra measure to get this even tighter for the finish sand by just sanding it into the board. So what I'll do is I'm going to go around with a hard pad, just a hard pad, and some 80 grit sandpaper, and I'm just going to quickly sort of key up the area on top of the resin just so there's a nice bond for the hot coat, and just smooth around that rail, taking any sort of lumps and bumps out of the tape. So this isn't really about getting it flat, this is just putting a bit of a key. Remember, it is laminating resin on top, so it still does take a natural bond to the resin. Just very lightly going over it. So I want that hard edge coming in just off this soft edge, just as it builds, just giving myself enough resin for the sand finish to really blend it in. But you can kind of see that how that line just follows the rail line really, really nicely. Got my resin. Ideally you want to be using around 300 grams on the board. I've actually mixed up about 375 grams just for excess, because usually when we're in production methods at the factory, we won't just do one board at a time. We'll usually do sets of 2 with 4 boards in rotation, so 2 bottoms, 2 decks, and just keep it going like that. But obviously we're just doing 1 at a time now, so I've just given myself a bit of extra resin because better safe than sorry. I'm gonna add the wax, 2% wax, and that sits on top of the resin. What you want to make sure is when you're mixing the resin that you're kind of folding the resin in so that your wax solution is really going into the resin, because the idea of wax solution is that it rises to the top of the resin, which gives you the easier sealed coat of resin to be able to sand it. If you don't use the waxing styrene, that doesn't happen and your resin stays kind of sticky and tacky, and it's really, really hard to sand. Add your catalyst, so we're using 1.5% catalyst. That goes in, that sinks to the bottom, so you don't have to mix it quite as thoroughly. Good thorough mix. Now I'm going to use a squeegee, and the reason I use a squeegee, again, this is a precautionary measure, but I want to make sure it gets into every gap into the cloth. So by squeegeeing it down, you're really making sure that your resin is hitting, and just making sure before I start the actual hot coat that any raw cloth has got resin really bonded into all the grains of it. Squeegee all the glass and pour a strip of resin down the middle, and we're going to separate that strip with our brush, and then we're going to use the strip just softly posting that out onto the rail, making sure there's a nice liberal coat of resin and we're not leaving excess behind the brush. So you can see I just poured out a really nice amount onto the rail, and then obviously do the same on this side, just keeping a slight 45 angle to the brush. I'm just going to push that line of resin onto the rail. The idea is to leave an even a coat as possible. The next stage, once we've done that, which is cross strokes. So very light cross strokes down the board, back up the board. Don't take too long, don't add too much pressure. You don't want to throw resin off the board, you're just really getting it nice and even. Now with a very light pressure, because I don't want to move resin really at all, starting from the stringer, going to roll my brush all the way down both sides of the board and onto the rail, and just taking any excess off. Very light pressure and just nice straight lines. And now if you look down here, you can see them drips on the underside. I'm just going to tidy that up with my brush. Nice clean brush with not too much resin, because we're going to smooth that out. We're basically going to go around the board. I start on the tail and I'm just going to paint that resin away. And what that's doing is that's giving us a nice extra layer of resin on top of our lap. Another precaution to getting it really, really nice and flat. When you tap the board like this, you're sending vibrations all through the board, which helps dissipate the resin. Something that I like to do after is just go over it, because sometimes you might leave a brush hair on your hot coat. So in a minute, we're gonna probably 15-20 minutes, the resin is dried but not completely cured. We're gonna flip the board over and we're gonna hot coat the deck, so watch this space. The bottom's set, we've left it approximately 20 minutes. It's quite a hot day, so the resin goes off. So the key is here, you want it to go off enough that you can flip it and put it on the wrap, but you don't want it to go so much that you're going to lose the bond to the hot coat you're about to do on the deck. If I put my nail in this resin, I can mark it up, but to touch, it's just about touchable. So what you want to do when you flip it is just minimally touch it, make sure you've got your gloves on, flip it on the stands and leave it, and then if you can see here, this is what you're left with. a nice bit of extra resin over the lap. So first thing we're going to do is cover the leash plug with a very handy size leash plug sticker. And then it's the same process now. Actually, a very slightly different process, because this side I wrapped around onto the rail. This next side I kind of just want to leave it to the bottom edge, which I'll explain when I'm doing it. I have cleaned my squeegee now, so I have a clean squeegee to do this next one. I've got my mixing stick, I've got my 4-inch brush again. So I'm just going to go and mix up 350 grams of resin again. That's 350 G's of resin. That's going to be 7 clicks of wax for 2%. Get that wax mixed in. Bosh, bosh, bosh. Nice fold and lift. Catalyst 1.5%. Just remember, the more catalyst you put in, the faster it heats the resin up to go hard. So you want the best balance of the little amount of catalyst as possible, so it doesn't make the resin go too hard, but you don't want your resin not to go off properly or to go off so slowly that it drains off the board. Bearing in mind, we're working in a factory that has 24-hour heat control in all of our resin rooms. So our laminating bay is always between 21 and 25 degrees, and then our hot coat room is exactly the same. So, and pour a little bit of resin out. Again, I'm just going to put it, just really sort of get it into the cloth. It really helps with sealing the board up, making sure you don't get any air. Actually makes the hot coat go flatter as well by floating into those gaps. And we're going to follow the same process. Strip of resin up the middle of the board, split that with my brush as evenly as I can. Now I'm going to work that strip of resin out to the rail, not pressing too hard on my brush because I want to leave resin there. Nice even coat. Now I'm going to go up and down the board, just nice and lightly, spreading that resin. Now I've done that, resin's falling onto the rail because the standard deck of a surfboard is domed. So something I do as a precautionary measure before I go up and down it on my final stretches, I go round the rail like this, just collecting any excess resin that I've left. That stops pulls and drips going down onto the rail, which are then not end of the world, it just makes it slightly harder to sand flat. Right, so now we're going to follow back to the process, nice and light with the brush. Just dangle the brush on the board. Up and down from the stringer. The deck always flows out a lot nicer, I think. Something really sort of visually quite cool to see. We don't really want to touch that deck again. All we're going to do is just go around with our tweezers, just making sure we haven't left any dust or bristles from the brush or whatever. But you can see it setting nice and flat now. You can see where the drips are forming. You don't want to be brushing them too far onto the flats at this stage. All you want to be doing is collecting that resin. I am just going to take those drips away. Notice I'm not going like super fast here because I don't want to leave loads of brush marks. You can actually take those drips off with a hard edge. So we use a knife. So all you basically do is find the bottom of the board blindly. You don't even have to look. You just run the knife up the bottom of the board and it will follow that lowest line where the resin's building. And say from just checking that the resin's flowing okay and I've got my mixes all right, that's done. So you can have a sealer. If you look under there, it's really, really nice and clean. It's a nice defined line. The board's completely encased in a lovely flat coat of resin. All I've got to do now is sand finish it and she's ready to go. She'll be in the water tomorrow, potentially. So that is the end of the hot coating video. So all we've got to do now is wait for this to cure up, which we'll leave overnight. So you want to be sanding this maybe 12 hours after you've done the hot coat, and the next video it will be the finished sand, the last job in the factory. Once it leaves the sanding bay, it's ready to serve. If you're liking this series, make sure that you subscribe to our channel because there's plenty more of this stuff coming. Give us a like, give us a comment if you want any other stuff. But yeah, if you're liking this sort of stuff, just let us know. We want to get as many people watching it as we can, hopefully help you guys build a knowledge of what it takes to build a surfboard, and then we're going to do some different constructions, loads of stuff. It's all going to come. So yeah, cheers for watching, like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube rubbish, and we'll see you next Friday where we'll be doing the finished sand. Yeah, boys and girls.